Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to our third webinar in our Program Integrity series. Today's webinar will focus on monitoring intake processes. I'm Mark Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the National Energy Assistance Directors Association. I'd like to now introduce our presenters who will be speaking in the same order. First, Matt Orlovic. He's a Program Analyst with the Administration for Children and Families. He'll provide an overview of the intake processes, as well as providing a broader perspective on how to think about monitoring intake. He'll be followed by Ralph Marcus, who's a Senior Advisor to the National Energy Assistance Directors Association and the former Director for the LIHEAP program for the state of Maryland. He'll be followed by Jennifer Lee. She's with the Energy Division for the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. Jennifer performs all the monitoring site visits for the Alabama LIHEAP program. Following Jennifer, we'll hear from Anita Taylor. She's the Work Assistance Director for the Tanana Chiefs Conference in the state of Alaska. Tribal grantees may remember her from the training meeting we recently had in San Diego, where she spoke on performance measurement. Following Anita, Cassandra Lovejoy, who's the project manager for the TNTA project for NEADA. She'll be moderating the question and answer period for about 30 minutes. If there are more questions, we'll get back to you separately. And then just a reminder, the next webinar will be on new performance measures, which will be on September 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, I'm Matt Orlovic. I'm a liaison with the Division of Energy Assistance in the Office of Community Services, and I work with Regions 5 and 7. I'm also on the monitoring team. In this presentation, I'll be giving a brief overview of the statutory requirements for monitoring, as well as some basic elements of monitoring that we look for when we perform our compliance reviews of LIHEAP grantees. The requirement to monitor both internally and at the local agency level is found primarily in Assurance 10. Assurance 10 requires that grantees establish procedures for proper use of LIHEAP money and to monitor those procedures to ensure that no funds are being misspent. We ask you about these procedures both in the model plan as well as the program integrity assessment. As with all of the assurances, we do not prescribe how you comply with the requirements. However, we look to see that you have adequate controls in place to ensure the integrity of your LIHEAP operations. I'll now go over some of the basic elements that we encourage grantees to adopt. Regular programmatic monitoring is important to ensure that local agencies are following the policies and procedures that you as the grantee adopt each year. It may take the form of desk monitoring, on-site monitoring, or a combination, though we encourage on-site monitoring whenever it's feasible and cost-effective. Listed here are some elements that generally should be examined as part of your monitoring regime. The exact documents and other items that you look for will depend on your unique requirements, but we expect that you will review client files to see if crisis time limits are met, if the client is eligible and received the correct benefit, if the proper documentation and explanations are in the file, and if proper referrals to other programs such as weatherization are made. Generally, you should also periodically review each local agency's internal controls, their internal procedures, and any training they provide to their employees, and any client appeals if the local agency is the first level of appeal. Monitoring should also include a financial or fiscal component. The frequency of on-site monitoring will likely be determined by the nature of your agreement with local agencies, what type of system you have, and how you transfer funds to them. But regardless of the method, you should be checking to see that all of their administrative costs fit your definition and have adequate backup documentation, such as timesheets and purchase orders. If your local agencies make payments to vendors, you should also review that documentation. You should also have a policy on any funds that are returned to the local agencies and ensure that they are following those policies and tracking the fiscal year the funds were originally received in. Finally, you should review their efforts to deter fraud and review any cases of fraud they've had. If you use LIHEAP funds for weatherization and you transfer funds to a different agency at your state, tribe, or territory, you still need to monitor those funds. Possible strategies are joint monitoring visits with your weatherization staff and reviewing the weatherization agency's monitoring reports. The strategy you choose will depend on the subgrantees used for weatherization and your relationship with the weatherization agency. However, it's important that you exercise oversight of weatherization funds in some fashion. As a reminder, you should also ensure that local agencies understand which rules you are running weatherization under, whether it's DOE rules, LIHEAP rules, or a combination. After performing compliance reviews in several states and tribes, we have seen some policies in place that we encourage other grantees to adopt. These include having a written monitoring protocol and policy in place, using risk assessments or other schedules to choose local agencies if monitoring every year is infeasible, formal corrective action procedures with follow-up and closeout, and requiring a standard format for case notes to allow reviewers to understand how a decision was made on a particular household. And here's my contact information if you have questions after the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Ralph Marcus.
Thank you, Matt. The objectives of my presentation are to outline the reasons for monitoring, the process, explain the process, some tools and outcomes, and to offer some practical checklists to assist grantees in conducting monitoring. This information applies to all grantees, whether they are states, tribal organizations, or territories. Sometimes when we speak about grantees, we often substitute the word state, but we're really also talking about tribal organizations and territories as well. Monitoring should be viewed not exclusively as a program integrity process, but also as a management process. The point of monitoring is to identify potential programmatic or administrative issues, ensuring that program operations follow applicable federal and state policies and guidelines. Management should view monitoring as a tool for program improvement. Monitoring should also be used as an opportunity for the state to obtain local agency input for the purpose of identifying possible policies that are not working as intended and to hear ideas for resolution. This can be helpful in identifying areas for future training or procedural revisions. Monitoring should not just be about the accuracy of application intake, but also about outreach strategies, how applicants are accommodated, options for submitting applications, etc. With this in mind, monitoring looks at whether the requirements of the block grant and contract terms are being met. Monitoring should be viewed as a precursor to a formal program audit as referenced in Assurance 10. The monitoring process is a formal process and should be familiar to the local agency or subgrantee. In other words, the subgrantee should know the expectations of service delivery. Expectations are normally described within a formal contract, training sessions, regulations, operations and procedures manuals, any action transmittals, and any other documents or communications issued by the grantee. Why monitor intake? This webinar focuses primarily on the monitoring of application intake, which is right at the root of LIHEAP. While there needs to be fiscal monitoring and other types of monitoring, such as fuel vendor monitoring, intake is the basic process during the implementation of LIHEAP. With this in mind, it is critical that the elements of intake be monitored to ensure that the applicant has an efficient and fair application process, ensure that policies and procedures are followed, identify inaccuracies in the application process, identify areas needed for improvement, and identify areas of risk for errors or program integrity shortcomings. In other words, monitoring helps make sure that we are in the good graces with the Division of Energy Assistance at HHS and can demonstrate to Congress that the program is operating properly. Okay, who performs the monitoring? On this slide, it actually should say grantee staff instead of state staff, because I did neglect to put the tribal organization staff as an item, and certainly that is included. And it also could be performed by contractors. Some states contract out their monitoring process. Grantee personnel with appropriate program knowledge and background are the best persons to make field visits. Contractors hired upon demonstration should be hired upon demonstration of appropriate program knowledge and skills. And monitors should have available to them the criteria for selecting records for review and a written interview tool, including a sheet for recording responses. What's monitored? The primary items that the monitor should review are the client application records and supporting documentation. To get a bigger picture, however, other elements about the intake process should be examined as part of the overall monitoring process. For example, questions about outreach efforts, questions about the applicant experience, such as the time it takes to complete the application and for payment to be made, questions about amenities for applications, such as adequate waiting rooms, children's play area, restrooms, and also the maintenance of confidentiality. Are there separate interview rooms, for example? For grantees that do not have a standardized statewide data system, each sub-grantee's data and storage system should be reviewed for potential adequacy, integrity, and confidentiality issues. It should also look at what type of internal control processes does the sub-grantee have in place. For example, does the agency periodically pull a sample of records for supervisor review? Prior to the visit for monitoring, monitoring really starts well before any visit is made to an agency. Agency staff must be aware of the requirements and expectations through training and the provision of documents, as I mentioned earlier, such as contracts, regulations, policy and procedure manuals, transmittals, and so on. Grantees need to conduct training for sub-grantee management staff and distribute these pertinent documents. Sub-grantees, in turn, need to conduct local training to all staff to ensure that everyone is aware of these requirements and procedures and policies. Also, prior to the visit, the monitor should make known to the sub-grantee what accommodations will be needed, such things as internet access, access to a phone, a copier, general workspace, the records that will be needed, types of records that is, and access to specific personnel. And in some cases, particularly if there is a centralized statewide data system, some information may be obtained and reviewed prior to the visit. Also, if you don't have a statewide system and regular reports are submitted by the sub-grantee to the grantee, then those could be reviewed as well. During the visit, first of all, the monitor should arrive at the designated appointment time. The monitor should conduct a pre-review or entrance meeting with the sub-grantee director and program leadership outlining what will be done during the visit. The monitor should obtain response to the administrative and programmatic questions on the interview tool, request the sample records for review and the place to review them. And it's important not to request the specific records in advance. You should wait till you get to the agency, because you don't want the agency spending extra time fixing records that need fixing. At the end of the visit, conduct an exit interview where the preliminary findings are reviewed with the agency contact person. You may want to have the sub-grantee representative sign off acknowledging that they have seen the preliminary report. In selecting the sample of records should be a random sample selected at the time of the visit. And while there's formulas for drawing a statistically valid sample, often the size of the sample is more dependent upon the number of staff, the number of monitors that can go out to visit, and the time available to conduct the monitoring. Sample size should vary, however, according to the caseload size of the local subgrantee. It suggested that the sample be drawn to include a range of the various types of applications, and here we've listed many of the types of applications. By drawing this type of sample, it ensures a more accurate picture of the intake accuracy, because there are some differences and there may be some different documentation required based on the type of application. Follow-up tasks. After the visit, the monitor should review the findings with the state director or the tribal director. They should follow up with a formal letter to the subgrantee executive director with the results, and if warranted, request a corrective action plan or suggest specific program improvements. In some cases, you may also want to include a copy of the letter to the board chair in the case of the nonprofits or community action agencies, for example. And also within the letter, particularly one that requires a corrective action plan, include a response date for that action plan. If serious errors were found, a follow-up visit should be set for a time after the corrective actions have been implemented to determine if improvements have indeed occurred. Whether subgrantees are awarded LIHEAP funds through a competitively bid contract or through a grant process, there should be a formal legal agreement or contract that identifies all the tasks and activities required of the contractor. Sometimes the contract is a somewhat general document, but the more detailed a contract is in outlining the requirements, the greater clarity there is in what is expected of the subgrantee. A contract can be subject to termination for non-performance by the subgrantee, and monitoring is a method of determining if a subgrantee is performing as expected. Part of the contract is a section called Contract Deliverables. And here you see a list of some things that were included in ours in Maryland, but it would really include anything that you require within your state. And it should be the type of documents, also include a due date, if there's a specific format that it's to be in, the format, and so on. This provides a clear record of what is supposed to be submitted. Other considerations, the frequency of monitoring visits depends on the number of agencies, the number of staff available for monitoring, and specific situations at the subgrantee. In Maryland, we were visiting every year, but I understand in some other states that are much larger, it may be every 3 years, at least once every 3 years. In Maryland, we only had 20 agencies. Some states have a lot more than that. And certainly subgrantees that are determined to be at risk, such as having a bad audit or chronic lateness in reporting, a large number of complaints about the agency, or failed monitoring reports, those types of situations may require more monitoring and very possibly multiple times during the course of the program year. Use the monitoring visit as an opportunity to let the subgrantee identify any issues affecting program operations that could be addressed by the grantee. This is an opportunity for input from the subgrantee to the grantee. A number of grantees now accept applications online, so care should be taken to review these applications as well, as they may present some additional challenges such as accurate information, duplications of applications, inadequate documentation. One of the things that surprisingly happens is when people fill out their application online, even though they should know the information, sometimes they do make mistakes. And finally, when a subgrantee has multiple intake sites, an effort should be made to visit and review the records and processes from those other sites. It's very possible that there are differences at the different sites. The next two slides is just kind of a checklist of some questions. First, more or less preparedness type questions, and then the next checklist is for reviewing the application documentation. And being prepared to deliver the service is important. You want to make sure that the agency can deliver an effective and efficient service to the client. And here's a list for reviewing the documents. And what I want to point out is that there will be a couple of files available for download of sample interview tools. And there's one kind of a generic form that we had used in Maryland, and also one that is being used in Florida. That one is of particular interest because in Florida they do not have a statewide data system. So that tool is extremely detailed. And I want to thank Hilda Fraser for providing that to us. She's the former director in Florida. And it really goes into a lot of detail. It gives a lot of good questions to ask. It's pretty long, but it's well worth it. And Cassandra will explain at the end of the presentations how to download those files. And just to conclude, monitoring outcomes is one of the things to view as part of the overall process. The outcomes are to ensure compliance with laws and policies and regulations, to identify potential shortcomings and suggestions for improvements, and it also can help to promote a partnership between the grantee and the sub-grantee. Too often, I think, monitoring is viewed as kind of an adversarial process, and it really does not need to be that. We're all in this program to deliver a service to the client, so anything that we can do to improve it is really a partnership between the grantee and the sub-grantee. And again, monitoring is used to promote the delivery of effective service. And next up is Jennifer, who will offer details from her experience as a field monitor in Alabama.
Thank you, Ralph. My name is Jennifer Lee. I'm one of 2 LIHEAP monitors with the state of Alabama. I will start off with a little background information on how the Alabama LIHEAP program is set up. Applications are taken by our sub-grantees. We have 21 community action agencies and one nonprofit organization, which serve all 67 counties in our state. Applicants call their local LIHEAP intake office and schedule an appointment. At this time, we do not accept online applications. And there is at least one LIHEAP intake office in every county. Some counties have more than one office in the larger population centers, such as Birmingham, Mobile, Huntsville, and Montgomery. There are a total of 120 intake offices currently. So at the appointment time, the intake worker makes copies of the required documentation that the client has brought, and this is kept in the client file. And at the same time, the intake worker will enter the documentation into our statewide database called FaxPro. This is done in real time, so if a client gets an award or a note is made in the client file, we at the state level can see it immediately. We conduct on-site monitoring visits to each agency at least once every fiscal year. Right now there are 2 monitors, myself and Kelly Chastain. For most of the agencies, the visits are split between Kelly and I. But for about 5 or 6 agencies that handle the larger volume of clients, we usually team up and monitor it together. Most agencies maintain their client files at the main office. We spend a majority of our time there reviewing files, but we also visit each of the agency's intake offices. During each visit, we'll start out by conducting an entrance conference with the executive director and LIHEAP coordinator to discuss what we will be looking at while we're there. We observe how and where the case files are maintained. Files must be kept locked when not in use, and they should be in a secure location at the agency. Alabama has both a heating and a cooling program, and we review what we call regular or general assistance client files, as well as crisis assistant files for both the heating and cooling programs. When we are ready to sit down and look at client files, we take a random sampling and we look and verify the required documentation was collected. For the application, we look to make sure that the client has signed the application as well as the intake worker. We check for accuracy and confirm the award amount during the review. And we also will look at case notes if there are any. We review client identification. The intake worker should make a copy of a current picture ID of every applicant. Only the head of household or their spouse can apply for LIHEAP. If they are over 60 or disabled, they can sign a second-party authorization form and someone else can go to their appointment on their behalf. For household member identification, the intake worker will verify the Social Security numbers for all household members. And during monitoring, we review proof of gross monthly income for the household. In Alabama, our program determines eligibility based on the previous month's household income. So if a household is over the income guidelines in a particular month, they have the opportunity to reapply later if they meet the income guidelines. Acceptable proof of income includes documents such as copies of paychecks, records kept by those who are self-employed, documents from social agencies such as the Department of Human Resources, which can provide a current food stamp letter that will show the income for the household. Also, the Social Security benefits letter from the Social Security Administration, or they can also provide unemployment verification from the state's Department of Labor. Also, if a person in the household is over 18 and they're not a full-time student and they have zero income, we require a notarized statement from a person not living in the home to verify that information. For proof of residence, our database, called FaxPro, it verifies addresses to ensure that the household is being assisted at the appropriate agency. But if the system is temporarily down or applications are taken at a senior center or other outreach function, the intake worker can verify residence by reviewing the utility bill, the driver's license, the lease agreement, or other forms of documentation. Lastly, we will make sure that the client file contains a copy of the most recent utility bill or account information to ensure that the bill is in the client or the spouse's name, and also to verify that the address on the bill matches the client's address shown on the application. As we go through the client files, we write down certain information such as the name of the client, their Social Security number, household income, vendor name, award amount, size of household, whether or not there are any disabled, elderly, children under 5, and also if there are any utility allowances. After we review client files, we also take a look at batching and vendor payments. Our sub-grantees handle the payments to the utility vendors. Typically, while we're monitoring, we will choose between 10 and 15 files from the client files we've already reviewed, and we will ask our sub-grantee to let us see the check that was sent to the utility vendor. If the check was sent within 30 to 45 days from the time of application, we consider that to be a timely payment. During the visit, we will also review and update a 9-page document that we call the LIHEAP Monitoring Review Form. This is basically an overview of the agency's policies and procedures with respect to our program. The form focuses on specific agency procedures such as how does the agency schedule appointments with applicants, what is the agency's procedure for client intake, and how does the agency assure accessibility of services for elderly and disabled clients. At the end of every monitoring visit, we conduct an exit conference with the executive director and the LIHEAP coordinator to discuss any concerns or findings. We will send them a letter along with their board chair. We'll send them a letter within 30 days discussing any findings and requesting a corrective action plan. Or in the letter, we will confirm that there were no findings. Now I will turn it over to Anita.
Hi, good morning. This is Anita Taylor, and I'm with 10 Not Chiefs Conference in the Energy Assistance Program. Just a little bit about 10 Not Chiefs Conference. 10 Not Chiefs is a tribal organization. It is not a tribe. Under TCC, we do provide services to 42 tribal rural communities located in the interior of Alaska. Within those 42, 37 of them are federally recognized tribes. We also have a memorandum of agreement with the state of Alaska to serve an additional 6 surrounding communities for Native beneficiaries within those areas. We do operate with a resolution agreement with the 37 federally recognized tribes to operate the Energy Assistance LIHEAP program. Just a little bit about some of our rural villages. When we come to Alaska here, when we talk rural, we are very rural. There's about 90% of all of our villages you do not have road access to. So you have to fly to these villages, being that, yes, they are very, very small planes, and we do fly in 40, 50 below weather. We do have staff located out in our 37 federally recognized tribal councils, and they help us facilitate the Energy Assistance Program each year. They are called the Tribal Workforce Development Specialists, also known as our TWDSs. A little bit about 10 Not Chiefs intake process and monitoring. As I had said, we're very rural, so all of our applications are usually mailed out each year and are then completed by the household, which are then signed off by the tribal representatives. These, of course, are faxed, emailed, or mailed. Once the application is submitted into the main office here at 10 Knot Chief, the application is screened through our Energy Assistance database, which is accessed, and we do this screening by Social Security number. All households are required to have a Social Security number on the application. This is to catch when any duplicate applications that may come in, being that we may have received one from fax, then they had turned around and mailed one, and we want to make sure that same application doesn't get entered twice. So therefore, this system helps us catch those. This also helps catch any potential households that may have maybe claimed one child on 2 applications that came in at 2 different times. This again allows us to go back to the household member and talk to the tribal representative and identify who is going to claim that child. The applications are then screened at the same time to target our emergencies, and therefore those are directly given to the eligibility specialist, where we then call the household to verify the emergency of the heating request, and we validate their emergency, and if validated, we then work with the vendor immediately to get that heating need there. Reason for the call, sometimes we have found truly people will document an emergency, and in truth, when you go and ask them if there is lack of heating fuel or oil, are they out, come to find out they're not. They do have enough to be able to be processed within the same date order that we process all of our applications. We do then, after addressing all of our emergencies, we do have our applications put into a target populations, which are our elderly, 60 years and up, and children in the household that are under 4. Again, as I mentioned, all applications are then put in date order by the date in which the application was signed. Applications that are then pulled by the eligibility specialist here will then be screened in our state systems that we have a read-only view. One of them is the Eligibility Information System, also known as EIS. This system is run off of for Medicaid and food stamps, so therefore we do get to confirm Social Security numbers. We also are confirming maybe income that they are reporting on their food stamps case, should ideally link up with what they're reporting on their energy assistance application. In addition to the EIS system, we also have access to the Department of Labor, which is our DOL system, where we're able to go in there and identify if they are claiming unemployment and maybe had not reported it, and we can also view to find when they last worked and who that employer was. By having access to these systems, we have been able to identify some households that had not reported some work history and maybe had not reported their unemployment. Then we also screen for the tribal representative signature on the application. As I had mentioned before, majority of all of our villages have tribal representatives, and how we generate that is at the beginning of our energy assistance year, usually in October. We send out a request for 2 people's names to be given to us as authorized signers. These 2 people are put on a master list that we operate off of if we are to receive an application from their community and the household did not get their application signed off by one of the authorized signers, we will send that application back. These authorized signers really help us because they really know the community out there, they know the households and who's living in there, and they're really helping us be in those second pair of eyes within that community to ensure that the household is reporting correctly. If the application upon the initial intake by the eligibility specialist screening finds that any of these pieces may be missing, such as not all income verification was sent in, Social Security card was not provided, maybe the household forgot to sign the application, again, the tribal representative, authorized signer, didn't sign it, or even if they have did not choose their heating source, if it's wood or if it's oil. Of course, again, if we don't have the vendor's name, it's really hard to get a payment out to that vendor, so we need them to identify that vendor and making sure that we have a vendor agreement on file with the vendor in which they have selected. This hold notice does go out. They are given 30 days to be able to provide the information. If not, that application will be denied at 30 days, and then a letter will be sent with a new energy assistance application again for them to submit for a chance to go ahead and get us the appropriate verification and eligibility information to process their application. This helps us not to get so bottlenecked. It helps us not to be able to have a forward motion when we're working with our applications, and therefore has been pretty successful with our program. We also, right before we batch, we do have a second person review all applications. So we have one person that is the eligibility specialist that does that intake process from front to back and actually comes up with a payment level for that household, being that it is approved or denied. All these applications are then set aside for a second reviewer to come in to verify all that information one last time, to catch maybe sometimes those key entry errors on income, and to make sure all of the backup documentation that we must have for a single point of audit is there, and then signs off on that application where it finally gets processed over for ready to be batched. Yes, we do batch our payments. Usually every 2 weeks we have groups being sent out. If it is an emergency, again, we do have vendors that we work with and have worked with for many years, and have sent out letters that identify what their benefit will be, and therefore they're very patient on allowing us the time to be able to generate that payment. Right before the batch is printed and ready to go to accounting, we do run one last report, and that is our duplicate Social Security report form. And this again is the one last check system to ensure that there's no duplicates in the system. If there is a duplicate, and the only reason why it should be there is because of a denial on a previous application and a resubmittal of a new application. And there is a part in our system where we can put notes in there that we should be easily to see that when we're looking at this report. That is pretty much our process, and I'd like to say thank you and Anabasi, and have a good day. I will turn it back over to Cassandra.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you to all of our speakers. It's now time to do the question and answer session.
Okay, the first question, and this person hasn't logged into the web portion, so it's a 509 area code, and let's hear your question.
Hi, this is Linda Walker with the Yakama Nation in Toppenish, Washington, and all we could have was auto, and I was just wondering if you could somehow email me the PowerPoint that you were doing at the beginning of the conference.
Yes, absolutely. We will be sending out the all of the presentations for anybody who was unable to access them during the webinar.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Cass. It's Jane Blank from Wisconsin. Just a question for any one of the presenters would like to, or all of them if they'd like to answer. I'm interested in what method is used to determine the number of files to be reviewed per subgrantee.
Anita or Jennifer, do you want to take that?
This is Jennifer from Alabama. I'll answer that question. Typically, we aim to do 10% of the client files, and if there are issues or findings, we will look at all of them if necessary. Does that answer your question, Jane?
It does. Hi, Jennifer. 10% seems like a lot, and for some of our grantees, the size of the caseload that they're managing, 10% would not be so bad, but 10% would be extremely unwielding. What is that? How does that influence then the time spent with, each sub-grantee then?
Right. Well, sometimes we're not able to do the full 10% at one visit. We might have to go back, but typically, the smaller agencies, I'll go out and probably within 2 days, I'll review files within 2, maybe 3 days, and then I think I mentioned it in my presentation. For the larger areas, a second monitor, Kelly and I will go out and we'll spend 3 days, if not 4 days. So we're there quite a while, and we do attempt to get to 10%. Now, we may not have the caseload that other states do.
That's a good point. Okay.
We
you
may
have
not
a cooling
have that.
program, right, Jennifer?
We have cooling and heating. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Yes, it's very helpful.
Hi, this is Leslie from the state of Delaware. My question was for Anita in Alaska. How do you validate the emergencies that you mentioned, that you expedite?
The validation would be usually first a phone call immediately to the household to identify the situation. Sometimes we can't get a hold of the household there. Like I said, our tribal councils, our tribal representatives, our tribal workforce development specialists know the community and usually can get to the household very quickly to us to allow us to know if there's emergency need in place. There is another mechanism, just to let you know, we do have our 1-800 number that people do call in and report emergencies as well. But sometimes we're dealing with people that maybe do 2 modes of communication. Maybe they're writing it on that application because it is a question that is asked, and then others, of course, are going right to the tribal council and getting on the phone to us.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is David in Oregon. Jennifer, I'd like to know how you handle recurring findings, something that comes back year after year.
Typically, we find that it doesn't, or at least we have a workshop, a training workshop every year. That if there is something we saw in years past, we'll make sure to have a discussion on it. But most of the time, once we discuss something with the agency, they've got it. They'll clear it up, and we usually don't see it again unless there's been a change in leadership or a change in employees. But typically, we don't see a recurring problem.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Dave, this is Willie. We've had it in the past, recurring problems, and what we do, the next step, put them on high risk. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Jennifer, at that point, Jennifer kind of turns it over, and we get our auditors involved, and and other people, and we make that determination. If they have one problem, same problems reoccurring, we place them on high risk until they get them resolved, and we have defunded them.
So you have actually defunded people?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Well, I know how you have other ways of helping.
Does that answer your question? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
It does,
sure.
thank you.
You're welcome, Dave.
Hi, this is Aikem Raman from Massachusetts. I have a quick question about self-employed applications. Question to all of you, whoever chooses to answer. How do you certify and monitor self-employed applications?
I know, this is Anita with Canada Chiefs. I know that we work a lot with subsistence here in our rural communities, and a lot of people do self-employment with seed work and skills of that nature. So a lot of times we can catch those reports coming in on the application, and we do have a self-employment worksheet where they can document what their monthly income was for the month in which they're reporting. We also are able to capture some of this from the EIS system, eligibility information system through the state of Alaska, and we usually can validate that with the household as well.
Great. Do you take any deductions of their taxes?
No, we do not. Only being that we operate our program off of gross income for 1 month, previous 30 days from the date in which you signed the application for energy assistance.
And you'd analyze that, right?
Determine what you mean analyze.
Like, so for example, you look at someone's self-employment income for 1 month, if I understood it correctly, and then you'd use that 1 month's worth of income to come up with the LIHEAP annual income. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct, being that there is self-employment for that previous month, yes.
But you don't require taxes? Like,
I do not.
You do not. Okay. Anyone else is using taxes? Anyone on the...
In Maryland, we also use the gross income, and we would look at their information about income, and again, try to determine what's reasonable, and we also go back for a 30-day period.
Okay. Thanks, Marcus. Ralph, this is a related question, and for you and others on the panel. When we review, we require taxes. So when we look at taxes, we see a lot of assets, money setting aside, so on and so forth. And we don't have a asset policy here in Massachusetts. We do have some very limited kind of asset testing. So my question is, to what extent any of you look at assets and count it towards LIHEAP income, and if there are any exceptions to it?
We would not count assets towards income. Now, if there was something being earned on that, we would count that, like interest or dividends, something like that.
Right.
That would be counted.
Okay. While I'm on the phone, can I ask one more question? Some of you mentioned monitoring vendors during on-site assessments. How would you do that exactly? Like, what kind of things you would be looking for?
Did you say monitor vendors?
Yes, yeah.
Vendor payment?
Yeah, let's say vendor payments or vendor itself,
You're talking about the fuel vendors delivering fuel?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, generally, the way that would have been done would be to first obtain records of the payment from the agency or from the data system.
Unregistered.
And then go out to the vendor and examine their records, particularly, fuel, oil, or kerosene, something like that, and look at their records of delivery to see that they delivered the full benefit.
Okay.
ACOM, this is Yulia from OCS.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. So in terms of assets tests, the state of Montana has a pretty sophisticated assets test.
Mm-hmm.
It is very well described in their LIHEAP policy manual, which you can find on their website.
Okay, we'll look into that. Do you know if asset test also being shown on the clearinghouse website? But obviously we'll check Montana first, but if there are any other states, would you know?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we'll look into it and let you know.
Okay, we'll check.
I'm sorry, I haven't memorized the clearinghouse.
No, that's okay. It sounds like that you're recommending Montana because they have a pretty well laid out policy, right?
Yes, that's having just gotten back from a site visit and having read the policy, you can definitely take a look at it.
Actually, I think Kay and Sherry from the clearinghouse are on the line, so if you wanted to jump in here and talk about any resources available on the Clearinghouse website, that would be great.
Give me just 1 second, and I will bring Kay into the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, we do have a few, some resources on our website that pertain to monitoring, and also one of the sub-grantee documents, the full contracts. I probably need to check with the states as to whether it's okay to post those. I mean, they're huge, relatively huge contract documents, but some of the forms used for monitoring are on the website. If you click on state programs and then you click on administration and then tools, and of course there's always available for download state plans and manuals, and a lot of the manuals will have a lot of detail on monitoring as well.
Okay, thank you, Kay. If anybody else, again, has any other questions, please press 01 on your phone. So here's some more information about monitoring intake. I will be uploading some examples of monitoring reports that Ralph mentioned during his presentation. In addition, you can go to the LIHEAP Performance Measures website off of based at NCAT, and they have a section on sub-grantee monitoring. And if you have any questions that you are unable to answer or have answered during this call, feel free to get in touch with me or feel free to get in touch with somebody over at ACF, and we should be able to help you out. And with that, I would like to thank you all for participating, and thanks very much to all the speakers for giving us such valuable information. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.